we're back to another episode of Fullback, which is the Barca podcast that we do of all things Barca, everything that happens in the last week, and we try to summarize them and give our own comments on that. So this week we're back with another episode. Well, Dom's right there. So without further ado, let's just jump in.
Yeah, guys. So obviously Copa del Rey happened this week, Dev, and it was another convincing victory for Barcelona over there. I want to say a very comfortable opponent at this point, which is Valencia. They did not do well against Barca. What was it, 12 goals scored in the last two games? That is a bit insane. But yes, Valencia are not really in the best of shapes at the moment, but it doesn't really take anything away from those wins and from flex setups. So your initial thoughts, Dev, on the game, and then we'll discuss the potential opponents a bit more later on.
Yeah, incredible. 12 goals scored. Valencia didn't park the bus. I would have expected them to do that, but for whatever the reason, Valencia played. The second game, I don't think they had the full strength team. The first game they did, but the second game, a lot of people were missing. And I think their coach is also prioritizing their survival in La Liga. It's such a huge club. It's sad that they are here. They should be among the top teams in La Liga. And I feel bad about that. And the fact that the other sad part of it was that the person who inflicted so much damage on them in this game was Ferran Torres, who is actually a Valencia homeboy. So yeah, lots of side stories. Anybody who is a Barca fan watched it, enjoyed it, liquid flowing football, attacking football, fast-paced football, totally entertaining. And we scored a ton of goals. And all of them were good goals, except maybe the Lamine goal, which probably shouldn't have happened, but happened anyways. But overall, Barca on a good streak in the beginning of the year. So obviously, this weekend will be very interesting to see what the table looks like, especially with the Madrid and Atleti game that's coming up. But it was a great win. And obviously, now we have four teams that can be potentially our opponents. Maybe it's not a bad idea to face Madrid in a two-legged tie. Imanol understands our weaknesses much better and exploits them much better. Atleti can go either ways. You don't know on that particular day what will happen. And it's not that Madrid is any easy. They score a couple of goals and that's it. So what are your thoughts as well?
It is funny. I know this is disrespect to Madrid fans, obviously. But yes, they look the most disorganized of the three potential opponents. And that plays to our strengths because if you don't really defend well, or don't have a set structure in defense and give Barca space and give them these opportunities, they will score, right? Barca are not perfect, but they know how to score goals, especially when you create that environment in which they thrive, which Madrid have done in the last couple of games that we've played against them. Now, would Madrid change their setup slightly, adapt, knowing what they know now? Maybe. But then again, Ancelotti is not really that kind of a coach. He's also someone who doesn't tinker too much, who doesn't really impose his rules and setups and structures that much on the players. Yes, Madrid may be a bit more likely than Real Sociedad because Real Sociedad have a set. They are so disciplined. They're so aggressive. They know what they're doing. They know how to exploit us, as Dev said here. So I think they would cause us the most issues, and I think their approach would make Flick second guess his decisions as well. For example, to stop those aggressive counterattacks, or does he want Eric Garcia, for example, because he knows the pressure will be on the back line and he will need players with Eric's calmness on the ball more than he will need someone like Araujo, who may not really be the best candidate to face the Real Sociedad press with the ball at his feet. And because that's an exploitable flaw, especially against a team that is as intense and as structured in the press as Real Sociedad are. So again, I think the game against Real Sociedad would bring more variables into play, which you don't want as a Barca coach. Whereas Madrid is what you get. Unless Madrid adapt, you know that you will get your chances. And as long as we can stay as lethal as we have been so far, we would be the favorites in that game. Now, Atletico Madrid, they're funny, right? They are having their own resurgence as well. But we played them off the park last time we met, right? We were clearly the better team. Now we lost that game, and that's the sad part. But we played really well, and I would say that if you play that same game 10 times in a row, you will win more of those games than you will lose. Okay? So if we can replicate that, I would still favor us more than Atletico Madrid. So that's the verdict of all three.
While I know I've enjoyed the Madrid games as any Barcelona fan has, but facing them three times again, because there'll be two games in Copa and then there'll be one more in the Liga. With Madrid, with the quality that they have, the only thing that is that they have some of their players who are out injured, so they're also facing an injury crisis right now. So that can play into our hands. But I would Left to myself, I would possibly not want them.
I really buy your point there. The Madrid are always going to be tricky, right? They can show up and suddenly be the best team
That's
in the
it.
world, or they can just crumble and collapse immediately. So you don't know what you're going to get, especially in the Clasico. Everyone keeps saying form doesn't matter in Clásicos, and yes, it doesn't matter in Clásicos.
So let's talk about the position of the table and let's talk about some scenarios. Let's assume that Madrid win. Let's assume it's a draw, or let's assume Atleti win. So there are three options, right? How do you think things will look on Monday on the table?
I think the best case scenario is still a draw between Atleti and Real Madrid, obviously, just get a point each. Now, the next best scenario is Atleti win and then Real Madrid win. Now, how will it actually play out? I would say that Atleti can beat Real Madrid, and I think that so a draw and Atleti win, I think are at the moment more likely. I don't know. I hope that a draw happens. That's my hope, and then I think we can and should beat Sevilla, regardless of the away game. So I think we have that quality, and I think we should go for it, regardless of what happens in the other game. We look at ourselves, and I think we should and will win that game.
We have seen the resurgence of many of the so-called French players who have suddenly become very important.
We've been saying we have a thin squad that cannot really sustain any run on form because they don't have the luxury of rotating properly. You can rotate, but then you lose on quality, you lose on profiles, etc. Right? But now it seems that the French players actually stepping up and they can go and look at the bench and say, okay, I can put Fermin in, I can put Ferran in, I can rotate Frankie de Jong and Casemiro, and I won't lose much. In fact, in some cases, I will even gain quality in certain areas, certain situations against certain opponents. And this makes Barca that much more deadly because, yes, it gives you rest for your key pieces, quote unquote key pieces, but it also gives you that extra trump card, something different, a plan B, let's say. If plan A fails, Flick now has a reliable plan B. There's a plan B, and plan B is almost as effective, and sometimes in some cases even more effective than plan A, because we've been seeing people say, okay, Ferran should actually be the starting number 9 ahead of Lewandowski in many cases. And there is an argument there to be had. Frankie de Jong, as you said, has been having a resurgence himself, starting over Casemiro. There's an argument there to be had as well. Now, Fermin Lopez, well, he's still situational in that midfield. He still has his uses, and he's been showing his quality in games where his quality can actually be highlighted and put under spotlight. He performs in those cases. So all these players have been very reliable, and that, to me, it gives us more hope and optimism going into the season because we've been saying the biggest issue of this Barca side is the thin squad and the lack of that bench. But now it seems this bench is coming to life, and this is the extra oomph that this Flick side needs because we couldn't buy players in the transfer window. We couldn't really sell players either to buy those new players. So we have to rely on what we have. And being able to rely on that might make all the difference in the world.
It definitely helps. It also helps with certain things like squad planning. And I don't know how much, as I said, we are maybe Ferran's overperforming. But as you think about the summer window, which I'm sure people like Deco and others are thinking about, and if you have this squad and this squad is firing in the way it is firing right now, the kind of players that you go out for in the market is vastly different, right? You can actually think about your squad in a different manner and invest in that way. Whereas if your substitutes are not good enough, then you'll have to think about who the substitutes are going to be. And then your spending becomes manipulated by that. So I think there's lots of benefits of this coming along. The question, though, however, becomes a little bit more granular. As of this moment, I feel Eric Garcia is more of a starter material than a Ronald Araujo. It doesn't mean that Ronald Araujo is a bad defender. He's a great defender, but I think he still needs a little bit of adjustment. Marc Bernal had an almost flawless start to the season. And then you have Frankie coming back into his own. I just don't see all three of them residing peacefully in the same team if that comes down to it.
So you have 3 players competing for the similar spots in a team. Now, if we assume that Pedri is the only undisputed starter, there's 2 more spaces there to fight for. And now you have 2 spaces, but you have Gavi, Frankie, Bernal, Casado, and Olmo potentially. Now, which of those players are fine with being the fringe players? Frankie, certainly not. His wages, even his PR, it wouldn't handle being a fringe player, right? Unless he renews on a ridiculously lower salary and
Which he's not going to do.
Yeah, that's probably not going to happen. Yeah, I agree. Frankie, not. Gavi, Casado, Bernal, Olmo. I think again, Olmo being the luxury sign that we made, is he going to be reduced to a fringe player? Maybe because of his injuries anyway. So he's more out of the team than in at this moment because he's just not available to play. Now you have Gavi, Casado, and Bernal. We don't know in what state Bernal will return. That's the sad part. If we say or assume, okay, Bernal comes back, he's the same player, and he's the player that he can improve at the same steady rate that he was improving in, then you have a case for him being a undisputed starter somewhere down the line, right? Casado is the only one of those players that I feel like would be okay by being a French player that still contributes, but not an undisputed starter. The rest of them are all fighting for these spots. So I would say that, yes, someone will have to leave. There's too many players fighting for the same spots there. And Frankie de Jong, as good as he is or can be, I think at the moment he's still the player with the highest chances of actually leaving unless he gets what he wants, which is starting position, playing time, importance in the team, and contribution to the team, which at the moment he's getting a bit more of, but that hasn't been the case on a consistent enough basis for a player of his stature and his wages as well.
Many people who are La Masia, diehard La Masia fans, they will say, yes, this is good because homegrown players get an opportunity to grow. If he stays, then that means I just don't see these two very talented kids just hanging around for minutes. They're going to be snapped up by some other team, either it's Premier League or somewhere, and rightfully so, because they'll want to play. Between alternatives, what would you take? One of these La Masia kids leaving or Frankie leaving, and we continue, build, and just adjust with another profile or what have you?
So I do love Frankie de Jong. I think he's a wonderful player. I think that his skill set is can be replicated in the current squad. Not maybe at the moment to the same extent that the quality that he brings. He does things at a higher level than a Casa does in certain attributes. But I think Pedri and Gavi can do what Frankie does to a certain degree. They can do. Now, can you replicate what Gavi does and what Casado does in other players? I don't necessarily think so, right? So I would still say, okay, if Frankie goes, it's not the end of the world. I would still be sad because I love him as a player, but I think it's not the end of the world because maybe as good as he is, he's never going to be that player that we want him to be and need him to be at the highest level in Barcelona, right? So he may be that somewhere else, but I think after 6 years and several coaches, we're not really getting that Frankie, the elite Frankie that we know is there.
So it'll be like another Usman Dembele.
Potentially, yes, because Dembele left having not achieved what he was intending to achieve, but now he's achieving that something somewhere else. So yes, I think the parallel between them would potentially be there.
The noises looks like Flick wants him to stay. We'll see what happens. Let's talk about a couple of more things before we wrap up. Nico Gonzalez and his deadline day move to City. There are two parts to the story. One is the collective sadness of all Barca fans because they wanted Nico to be a Barca player. The other part is that Barca probably made some money from his sale. And then there's one other player, and you've been talking about him, I think, Alejandro Balde. Insane dribbling, insane speeds, his ability to pick up the right pass, create that attacking situation. He's been a different player. Like the potential was always there. Feels like he's reaching there. Which one do you want to take first, Dom?
Let's start with the transfers first. I think the good thing is Barca actually, yes, they are getting some money. And of course, yes, Nico leaving and Nico making it somewhere else. Again, a very weird situation for him. We were happy for him, but then again, could he have done this at Barca potentially? Yeah, maybe. But again, as you said, rightfully, there's a lot of players in that midfield, and who knows what would have happened, right? It's his right to go out there and look for more regular minutes, to look for a coach who will develop him a bit more, maybe look for a role that will suit him more in a different structure and setup. So we can't blame him for doing what he's been doing, and all the best of luck to him. But yes, Barca would now potentially have some money for the summer, and I do agree with you. I think we will still see a big signing. We will still see some exits, but we will see a big signing come this summer, and that will coincide with the Camp Nou and Laporta's election. It will be a lot of big events happening at Barca. Now the question is, what do you want to reinforce? So what's the priority here? Is it a forward? Is it a midfielder? Is it a defender? Is it a goalkeeper? You could theoretically put a new player in each of those positions, and you will still be right in a way. And so now it's all about what does Flick want to reinforce? What does he see as a weak spot that can warrant a big name? Because a big name is what's coming. It's not going to be a squad player. No. It's likely going to be a player that will go into the starting lineup and be there. The former are players who fit any scenario. The players that we've been talking about, Fermin, even Frankie de Jong, Ferran Torres, they're still situational picks. You put them in certain scenarios because they fit certain game states. Now, players like Pedri or Kubarsi or Balde or Lamin, especially, they fit all scenarios. You play them no matter what. Whereas the French players, they have their uses, but not always. There are games in which you go and say, okay, he fits that profile, I'll play him. But there are games in which you go and say, okay, he doesn't fit that scenario, I won't play him. A player that fits all scenarios, right? That is always going to be there, no matter the opponent, no matter the game state, no matter the context of the game. And now again, we go back to what is the priority to reinforce, because a reinforcement is coming now. Who is going to be that player? We don't know yet, and that's up to Flick, I think.
I don't know whether Rafael Leao, with
Yeah.
the way Rafinha is playing, is possible. We're not transfer
Don't know.
gurus or soothsayers. We can't see a crystal ball. Laporta being Laporta, he's going to make one signing when the stadium reopens. He will want that. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see what he does, and it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But for us as fans, it's good that Barca has some money in the bank. We're not broke as usual. And hopefully, the next summer window, we'll actually get to see some movement, which is always exciting for us as fans. Let's cut back to Alejandro Balde. You have a lot to talk about him, so why don't you take it first, and then I'll bring it away.
Yeah, I just want to show our receipts a bit, because we've been saying this for ages for Alejandro Balde. We've been screaming, okay, he needs some adversity, some challenges to kickstart his development, right? And one of the things that we've been saying that he needs to do a lot more of, it was even last season and even before that, he needs to invert a bit more. He needs to be put into these situations where they have to force his development a little bit, right? And that's exactly what he's been doing right now at Barca under Flick. He's been occupying those inverted, more central areas in the half spaces. This does two things, right, for him. It transforms his progressiveness, his runs, into a more of an offensive tool than being purely a progression tool. When you invert centrally, you're attacking the box directly, or more directly than you're attacking the space out wide. So that's number one. He's been more of an offensive tool. But number two, it makes his passing easier. It shortens the distance between him and the key players inside the box or in the danger areas. Him accessing a Lewandowski or a Pedri or an Olmo or anyone who's there, or Lamine even, when he inverts into such areas, is easier because there's a shorter distance there, and theoretically that makes his passes easier to execute. But also, it opens up different angles, because when you are centrally, you're facing the pitch forward, you can pass left, you can pass right, you can pass forward. Whereas when you're coming off the flank, there's only one way to go. It can only go that way that you're facing, because behind you or next to you is the line, so the limits of the pitch, so you can't pass there, obviously. So this has helped him tremendously. Now, he does have the La Masia foundation, so all players from La Masia do have a certain technical basics or foundation. So it was always there in him. These passes that he's making, the control of the ball, decision making, even, they're all there. But putting him in a more dynamic environment that has more challenges and more uncertainty, we have effectively kickstarted his, or forced his, development. And you know that struggle breeds excellence, right? And he has been struggling because he's been in unknown and uncertain environments, but now he's actually adapting and evolving as a player. And what we're seeing is still a glimpse of the player that he can be. But I've always felt that even without the final pass, even without being the most creative player on the planet, he is still elite. Now, adding this as a cherry on top of all that he can do physically and progressively and all that, defensively as well, it's going to be insane. So I really hope that this continues and that he continues showing us what he can do, for this Flick side. So it's very exciting, Dev.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would say is I find him physically a strong player. La Masia kids are generally like frail things, and you just hit them, you fall down. That's basically what. But with Balde, it's very difficult to dispossess him with physical force. He's strong, and he's young, so this will actually improve over time. So if he can get that acceleration, and if he improves on the dribbling that we are already seeing, the only thing that Balde probably needs to work on is his decision making and that final pass that can make all the difference in the world. His physique, his energy, his pace, his dribbling. You cannot build physicality. You cannot build through coaching. It just is there or isn't there. And I think if Flick can bring in his that final ball and his final decision, he will be an insane asset for Barca for the years to come, for sure.
Absolutely, I think he will be. There's nothing in the current formula that to me screams unsustainability, right? Especially, we said physically, he has that. He has that shock absorption. When players face him in a direct challenge, he's fast enough and strong enough to actually
Take them.
outmuscle and outrun. Yeah, he's the closest thing we have to a Naraujo in those situations in the whole squad, essentially. Frankie being potentially someone else,
The
but
other
he's,
one, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So we don't have that many profiles of such caliber, of such category in the team, and Balde kind of ticks that box. But he's also developing the other one, which is the technicality, decision making, and the passing, which has been on display this season. That's the exact thing that happened to Dembele at PSG. He's been put in a very dynamic environment that has a lot of uncertainty at times because there's a lot of rotation. Quicha, Desiree Doué, they're all moving around the pitch. Barcola moving around the pitch. There's no certain passes to make, and that forces the player to think a lot, develop a lot, and ultimately improve in decision making.
Last thoughts on Dembele. Dembele in PSG right now he's a free player. He's like the Messi. You can do anything. It's not that, okay, you've got to hug this touchline and just do this, which is what Xavi, which is Barca always gave him a specific role to play, and I don't think he's that player. I think Dembele can only be Dembele when he has the freedom to do what he wants to do because he has that innate skill in him, that pace, that trickery, that dribbling capability. I think profile-wise, the player that Dembele is, if you think about Dortmund also, when he burst into that scene, he had that freedom. He could play freely. And it's the same thing that we are seeing in PSG, where Luis Enrique has given him the freedom. That's it from us for this week. Look out for us in the next episode when we come back again next week. So till then, stay safe, take care, and Visca and Barca.